Over the past few years, I've reviewed a number of drones, but there's always one question that I get asked. How do I make the aerial sequences that are in the videos that I produce? And to answer that, we're going to look at the best settings for shooting video from any drone, how to frame your shot and perfect the motion, and the entire process of editing and color grading with Filmora 9, the sponsor of today's video. Now, I chose to work with Filmora for this process because it's a seriously easy editing software to get started with a great feature set and a one-off payment solution instead of a subscription like other companies offer. As we go through the various shooting techniques in this video, you'll see just how easy it is to create a sequence with Filmora. So whatever drone you use, whether it's a Mavic Mini or a Mavic Air 2 or something for another brand, there's a few settings that you need to be familiar with to get the most out of your footage before you can get to even editing your sequence. First up are your frame rate options. When shooting video at any resolution, 24 frames per second is considered the gold standard for the cinematic look, thanks to its natural range of motion and visual similarity to feature-length films. If the setting is there, be sure to make use of it for real-time shots, or a multiple of it for slow motion. If your drone doesn't have the ability to shoot 24 frames a second, which is quite common with more budget-friendly drones, that's not a problem. Most, if not all, drones designed to shoot video in some way will shoot at 30 frames a second, which can be slowed to 80% in Filmora to meet 24 frames a second playback. This is a technique that I used a lot in my review and my time with the Mavic Mini, where 24 frames a second wasn't available at the time. Shooting at 30 and slowing to 24 in post not only gives you the 24 frames a second final shot, but it also creates a music video type look, where motion looks close to real time, but also slightly more floaty and more artistic in nature than real time shots tend to look. It adds a visual flair and a little bit of drama to some shots like this, where 80% playback looks far more natural and far more enticing than real time looks. Once you've got your frame rate set, the next thing you need to focus on is your shutter speed. To get the most cinematic looking results, use a shutter speed that is equal to double your frame rate. So for 30 frames a second, use a 60th of a second shutter speed, and so on. Visually, the difference can be the make or break for your footage, as you can see right here, where the double speed rule looks far more natural than setting a shutter speed randomly according to just getting the exposure right. So if you set according to this rule, you may find your footage to be just a little bit overexposed. That's where ND filters come in, which reduce the amount of light and make it possible to shoot at such a slower shutter speed in bright daylight and direct sun. It's a little difference, I'll admit, but it should never be overlooked. So these are the settings that I usually use. 30 frames a second for the floaty look, 1/60th of a shutter speed, and a fixed white balance of 5600 Kelvin. After that, all that's left is for me to get the motion right. This is a pretty simple one, there's no numbers here, just a few things that you need to learn and put into practice when you're shooting. See, a common mistake that a lot of people make with drone footage is not framing the shot in a way that highlights your subject, whilst also not being distracting. Now, there's a lot of ways to frame shots with drones, whether you're revealing a landscape behind some trees or following a moving target. Here's some helpful guidelines that I follow when I'm filming aerial scenes. The first thing I do is to make sure that I have the grid enabled within the live view. Then after that, I keep the framing simple by just lining up the landscape and my subject by the rule of thirds. Sometimes I'll align the subject to one of the third lines or keep it dead center. However you choose to do it, the rule of thirds is a great method of composing a shot. And of course, to be creative, you shouldn't stick to just keeping things on the third by any means, but I often find it useful for beginning or ending a shot. Composition is one of the many aspects that make up good drone footage. The second, and arguably most important element, is the motion. What's so unusual and amazing at the same time with drones is the ability to film anything from anywhere, but you've got to do it right. I try to keep a constant range of motion throughout what I'm recording, which, yeah, it sometimes means you'll shoot the shot twice, 3 times, even 4 times, but it always means you'll be getting the best shot possible with the time you have in the set location. Take this shot for example. If I decided to do a simple, straight line past the pier, you probably wouldn't have noticed the cyclist. And did you at any point find the motion to be unnatural, or did it almost draw you into the scene a bit? Because what actually happened there is an almost perfect match of the motion, the camera angle, and the movement of the subject. It was luck. That's all that did that shot there. I didn't plan it, I didn't plan the cyclist, I was just going past and somehow got it right by following some of these tips. And I think that's really important. Some of my best footage over the past few years has been in situations where I've matched the motion of my subject, or used a simple technique like the rule of thirds to frame a shot in a cinematic way. The best advice that I can give for how to maneuver your drone is this. Think about the aim of your shot. Are you setting a scene or following a target? Once you decide that, it's easy to make sure the viewer's attention is exactly where you want it to be. Some of my favourite movements, like the turn reveal or the lineup, involve nothing more than a bit of intuition about your surroundings. Whenever I shoot in a specific location that I wouldn't usually go to, so I can't go back and shoot another day, I will always shoot for a sequence, not a bunch of individual shots. Each shot will be designed to work alongside another one. So take a few angles of even the same setup. If you're trying to follow a subject, then get some landscape things to set the scene. It's these types of little tricks that can really help when it comes to post-production. And once you're finished shooting, it's time to bring it into post-production. So let's head over to Filmora. For a typical cinematic look, 2.4:1 tends to be the go-to as an aspect ratio, so set up your timeline in 2.4:1 and set your frame rate to 24 frames per second, and the edit can begin. The first thing I do when I get all my footage into the timeline is make sure the speeds add up. Any shots that were done at 30 get slowed down to 80% really easily. It's pretty rare to get a shot perfect on the first try, so I tend to scrub through until I find the right in and out sections of my shot, and then use that as my basis for the rest of the sequence. For any sequences I make, I tend to cut to the music if there's a clear beat, by using the key sections of the track. Whilst we're here, let's work on the sound design. With Filmora you can have up to 100 tracks of audio, so let's drop in some sound effects to match each of our shots. Where there's clear cues of sound, like a car or a bird, we can pan the audio left and right and level it according to the position from the lens. Filmora has a built-in library of sound effects, so you can find the perfect sound for each of your shots. And if you can't find the right one there, then I'll link down below to some great resources that I use. And the great thing is you can get really creative with this process. If you've chosen music that has a build-up or an intense beat, then work with that. Or if you want something more peaceful, try some ambient music or light piano. Here's a few examples I've created that will show just how powerful your choice of music can be when setting the scene, and just how important it is to get the correct sound design done. If effects and slick transitions are a part of the style you're going for, then Filmora has you covered too. Just drag your chosen effect onto your timeline and it'll be integrated into your sequence perfectly and easily changed within the settings window. Once you have your sequence edited, it's time to grade it. Head over to the color menu and you can adjust settings like the white balance, the saturation and the exposure, and even add a LUT if you're going for a much more stylish look. The way you grade is mostly down to personal preference, but matching the same look for a shot in the same location is always good practice. Something I found particularly useful is the ability to change the white balance with Filmora. Now, although I usually shoot with a constant white balance, I have at times accidentally not done that, and it means there can be changes between different takes in different locations, so trying to match those together is just as easy as playing around with the slider until it looks right. It means you can match the differences between shots really damn easily. Grading can take your sequence to a whole new level, so don't be afraid to experiment here. Once you're happy with your sequence, head over to the export button, choose your format, resolution and quality level, and you're done. If you're just getting started shooting with drones and you want an editing software that is easy to learn and makes things simple, then that is exactly what Filmora does. But it does that without compromising on any of the key features that are essential to creating good video. As I hope you've learned in this video, the key to creating cinematic aerial sequences is not just one simple trick or hack. It's a combination of shooting techniques, the rules for editing, and the correct settings when you're shooting. Once you tick all of those boxes, you're on the right track to creating your next aerial masterpiece.